Hello, this is Greg Calliet, former president of the Cannery Row Foundation, and here to read for you chapter 17 of John Steinbeck's Cannery Row. In spite of his friend Lewis and his friends, Doc was a lonely and a set-apart man. Mac probably noticed it more than anybody. In a group, Doc seemed always alone. When the lights were on and the curtains drawn and the Gregorian music played on the great phonograph, Mac used to look down on the laboratory from the Palace Flophouse. He knew Doc had a girl in there, but Mac used to get a dreadful feeling of loneliness out of it. Even in the dear close contact with a girl, Mac felt that Doc would be lonely. Doc was a night crawler. The lights were on in the lab all night long, and yet he seemed to be up all day too. And the great sounds, shrouds of music came out of the lab at any time of the day or night. Sometimes when it was all dark and when it seemed that sleep had come at last, the diamond-true child voices of the Sistine Choir would come from the windows of the laboratory. Doc had to keep up his collecting. He tried to get to the good tides along the coast. The sea rocks and the beaches were his stockpile. He knew where everything was when he wanted it. All the articles of his trade were filed away on the coast, sea cradles here, octopi there, tube worms in another place, sea pansies in another. He knew where to get them, but he could not go for them exactly when he wanted. Nature locked up the items and only released them occasionally. Doc had to know not only the tides, but when a particular low tide was good in a particular place. When such a low tide occurred, he packed his collecting tools in his car. He packed his jars, his bottles, his plates, and preservatives, and he went to the beach or reef or rock ledge where the animals he needed were stored. Now he had an order for small octopi, and the nearest place to get them was the border-strewn intertidal zone at La Jolla between Los Angeles and San Diego. It meant a 500-mile drive each way, and his arrival had to coincide with the retreating waters. The little octopi live among the boulders embedded in sand. Being timid and young, they prefer a bottom on which there are many caves and little crevices and lumps of mud where they may hide from predators and protect themselves from the waves. But on the same flat, there are millions of sea cradles. While filling a definite order for octopi, Doc could replenish his stock of the cradles. Low tide was 5:17 a.m. on a Thursday. If Doc left Monterey on Wednesday morning, he could be there easily in time for the tide on Thursday. He would have taken someone with him for company, but quite by accident, everyone was away or was busy. Mac and the boys were up in Carmel Valley collecting frogs. 3 young women he knew and would have enjoyed as companions had jobs and couldn't get away in the middle of the week. Henri, the painter, was preoccupied. For Ullman's department store had employed not a flagpole sitter, but a flagpole skater. On a tall mast on top of the store, he had a little round platform, and there he was on skates, going round and round. He had been there 3 days and 3 nights. He was out to set a new record for being on skates on a platform. The previous record was 127 hours, so he had some time to go. Henri had taken up his post across the street at Red Williams's petrol station. Henri was fascinated. He thought of doing a huge abstraction called Substratum Dream of a Flagpole Skater. Henri couldn't leave town while the skater was up there. He protested that there were philosophic implications in flagpole skating that no one else had touched. Henri sat in a chair, leaned back against the lattice which concealed the door of the men's toilet at Red Williams's. He kept his eye on the eerie skating platform and obviously he couldn't go with Doc to La Jolla. Doc had to go alone because the tide could not wait. Early in the morning, he got his things together. Personal things went in a small satchel. Another satchel held instruments and syringes. Having packed, he combed and trimmed his brown beard, saw that his pencils were in his shirt pocket and his magnifying glass attached to his lapel. He packed the trays, bottles, glass plates, preservatives, rubber boots, and a blanket into the back of his car. He worked through the pearly time, washed 3 days' dishes, put the garbage in the surf. He closed the doors. but did not lock them, and by 9 o'clock was on his way. It took Doc longer to go places than other people. He didn't drive fast, and he stopped and ate hamburgers very often. Driving up to Lighthouse Avenue, he waved at a dog that looked round and smiled at him. In Monterey, before he even started, he felt hungry and stopped at Herman's for a hamburger and beer. While he ate his sandwich and sipped his beer, a lot of conversation came back to him. Glisdale, the poet, had said to him, "You love beer so much, I'll bet someday you'll go in and order a beer milkshake." It was a simple piece of foolery, but it had bothered Doc ever since. He wondered what a beer milkshake would taste like. The idea gagged him, but he couldn't let it alone. It cropped up every time he had a glass of beer. Would it curdle the milk? Would you add sugar? It was like a shrimp ice cream. Once the thing got into your head, you couldn't forget it. He finished his sandwich and he paid Herman. He purposely didn't look at the bill, the milkshake machines lined up so shiny against the back wall. If a man ordered a beer milkshake, he thought, he'd better do it in the town where he wasn't known. But then a man with a beard ordering a beer milkshake in a town where he wasn't known, they might call the police. A man with a beard was always a little suspect anyway. You could say you wore a beard because you like a beard. People didn't like you for telling the truth. You had to say you had a scar, so you couldn't shave. Once when Doc was at the University of Chicago, he had love trouble and he had worked too hard. He thought it would be nice to take a very long walk. He put on a little knapsack and he walked through India and Kentucky and North Carolina and Georgia, clear to Florida. He walked among farmers and mountain people, among the swamp people and fishermen, and everywhere people asked him why he was walking through the country. Because he loved true things, he tried to explain. He said he was nervous, and besides, he wanted to see the country, smell the ground, and look at the grass and birds and trees, to savor the country. And there was no other way to do it save on foot. And people don't like him for telling the truth. They scowled. They didn't like him, sorry. They scowled or shook and tapped their heads. They laughed as though they knew it was a lie and they appreciated a liar. And some, afraid for their daughters or their pigs, told him to move on, to get going, just not to stop near the place if he knew what was good for him. And so he stopped trying to tell the truth. He said he was doing it on a bet, that he stood to win $100. Everyone liked him then and believed him. They asked him in to dinner and gave him a bed, and they put lunches up for him and wished him good luck and thought he was a hell of a fine fellow. Doc still loved true things, but he knew it was not a general love, and it could be a very dangerous mistress. Doc didn't stop in Salinas for a hamburger, but he stopped in Gonzales, in King City, and in Paso Robles. He had hamburger and beer in Santa Maria, 2 in Santa Maria because it was a long pull from there to Santa Barbara. In Santa Barbara, he had soup, lettuce, and string bean salad, pot roast and mashed potatoes, pineapple pie, and blue cheese and coffee. And after that, he filled the petrol tank and went to the toilet, while the service station checked his oil and tires. Doc washed his face and combed his beard, and when he came back to the car, a number of potential hitchhikers were waiting. "Going south, mister?" Doc traveled on highways a good deal. He was an old hand. You have to pick your hitchhikers very carefully. It's best to get an experienced one, for he relapses into silence. But the new ones try to pay for their ride by being interesting. Doc had a leg talked off by some of these. Then, after you have made up your mind about the one you want to take, you protect yourself by saying you aren't going far. If your man turns out too much for you, you can drop him. On the other hand, you may be just lucky and get a man very much worth knowing. Doc made a quick survey of the line and chose his company, a thin-faced salesman-like man in a blue suit. He had deep lines beside his mouth and dark, brooding eyes. He looked at Doc with dislike. "Going south, mister?" "Yes," said Doc, "a little way." "Mind taking me along?" "Get in," said Doc. When they got to Ventura, it was pretty soon after the heavy dinner, so Doc only stopped for beer. The hitchhiker hadn't spoken once. Doc pulled up at a roadside stand. "Want some beer?" he said. "No," said the hitchhiker, "and I don't mind saying, I think it's not a very good idea to drive under the influence of alcohol. It's none of my business what you do with your own life, but in this case, you've got an automobile, and that can be a murderous weapon in the hands of a drunken driver. At the beginning, Doc had been slightly startled. Get out of the car, he said softly. What? I'm going to punch you in the nose, said Doc, if you aren't out of this car before I count to 10. 1, 2, 3. The man fumbled at the door latch and backed hurriedly out of the car. But once outside, he howled, I'm going to find an officer. I'm going to have you arrested. Doc opened the box on the dashboard and took out a monkey wrench. His guest saw the gesture and walked hurriedly away. Doc walked angrily to the counter of the stand. The waitress, a blonde beauty with just a hint of goiter, smiled at him. What'll it be? Beer milkshake, says Doc. What? Well, here it was, and what the hell? Might as well get it over with now as sometime later. The blonde asked, Are you kidding? Doc knew wearily that he couldn't explain, couldn't tell the truth. I've got a bladder complaint, he said. Polyketonectomy, the doctors call it. I'm supposed to drink a beer milkshake. Doctor's orders. The blonde smiled really assuringly. Oh, I thought you was kidding, she said archly. You tell me how to make it? Didn't know you was sick. Very sick, said Doc, and due to be sicker. Put in some milk and add a half bottle of beer. Give me the other half in a glass. No sugar in the milkshake. When she served it, he tasted it wryly. And it wasn't so bad. It tasted like stale beer and milk. It sounds awful, said the blonde. It's not so bad when you get used to it, said Doc. I've been drinking it for 17 years. And that's chapter 17. Thank you for listening.